Hello, bookworms. Welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and today I'm so pleased to talk to my friend, Marti Dumas. Marti is a mom, a teacher, and a creative entrepreneur from New Orleans. Her best-selling children's book series, Jaden, Toussaint, the Greatest, combines literacy with STEM skills and humor and adds a much-needed diversity to the children's chapter book landscape. Her latest novels, The Dragon Keep and The Little Human, are middle-grade fantasies being heralded for their skillful combination of science, family, and magic. And her recent foray into nonfiction with Women in the Old West earned her a starred review from the American Library Association's book list. I always love talking to Marti, and I was thrilled that she chose a book by an author I've always wanted to read. I know you're going to love hearing why Marti thinks Wildseed by Octavia Butler is the best book ever. Hi, Marti. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Hi, Julie. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you. I love it when I finally get a chance to talk to you again.
Yay. Ditto here. Even though we don't have coffees that we can swap with each other.
Right. Our favorite thing is the caffeine. Marti, I have so much I want to talk to you about, but I think what we ought to do is start with what your reading life was like growing up and how you became the reader you are. And the reason I'm so interested to ask you that is because you write books for young people. And I love that trail of who you were as a kid and what books were as in your childhood to now being a person who provides that experience for young people. Can you tell me about that?
Certainly. So I, sadly, am a very similar person now to the person that I was when I was 7. So you can decide if I was a precocious 7-year-old or if I'm a lacking 43-year-old. Those are your choices, right? But okay. When I was really little, I must have been so annoying. I could read at a really young age, but it always felt like such a gift, like an excitement, that there was what could have been secret information for people, but for the select few, the chosen, that you could decode that information. So I would be in the back of the car, in the bus, just literally reading every sign that passed, and no adult ever stopped me, which I know it must have been so frustrating for them, but they were very understanding of it. But I had a big sister too, and so then I strove to be like her in a lot of ways. And so we had tons of books around, and I don't ever remember there being a time when I wasn't reading or being a reader. The story that I most often tell where this kind of thing, I guess there are 3, but one of the stories that I most often tell when this kind of question gets asked me is that there was a bookstore that is not there anymore called The Little Professor that was maybe 4 blocks from my house. And when I was little, it was the 80s and kids were allowed to go and do things by themselves, and people didn't worry that we were going to be kidnapped, even though there was that whole milk carton thing with the kids on them. But still, we were allowed to go and do things, all of us, where everybody was. And I would walk to the bookstore and I would spend my little money on Babysitter's Club books. And they were right by the door. And I would go in, I'd be like, which ones are new? I think that there were probably 50 or 60 of them when I was that age. And so I was just determined to make my way through them. And one day, one of the owners of the Little Professor was like, I'm not going to let you buy this book. And I was like, what? And he was like, you come in every day and you spend your money on this book. And the next day you come in for another book. You're wasting your money on these books. You can just sit right there and read this book. And you can use your money to buy a different book that I'll suggest to you. So then he suggested The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was one of the books that he gave me. And I adored it and all kinds of things, whatever. So I really literally would just spend a good chunk of the morning reading on the floor in the bookstore And then I would buy the book that I was supposed to buy and take it home and read it at night. And so it was like that I read The Swiss Family Robinson, which I adore, like hiding underneath my grandmother's bed. I live in New Orleans and it's hot most of the year in New Orleans. And at the time, central air was not a thing that everybody had, or I don't even think I knew what that was. So maybe nobody had it, but people would have window units, like air conditioners in the windows in certain rooms. And my grandmother, who obviously was like a matriarch and had a place of privilege, had an air conditioner in her room. And it was the only one that would run all day. Like that was everywhere else in the house might be hot, but like in her room. So I would hide under the bed in her room with a flashlight reading, the Swiss Family Robinson and Pippi Longstocking and Strawberry Girl and just like all kinds of, I don't know, just all kinds of books underneath there. And it's such a pleasant memory for me. Like it feels comforting. And it's probably the reason that I like to have a room a little bit chilly to this day. But yeah, no, it was wonderful being able to live so many lives quietly, like learn so many things without having to go places and to find yourself in people that didn't seem very much like you on its face. So that was cool too.
I have to tell you, that story makes me cry a little bit. That bookseller telling you just sit down and read it and then buy something else. It just feels like one of those incidences of angels on earth, honestly.
Indeed. I totally, yeah.
Does New Orleans have a really good bookstore scene?
So New Orleans has a ridiculous number of small independently owned things in the city. One, which is Blue Cypress Books. It's lovely. Elizabeth, who owns it, is amazing. She's like whip smart, just like whip smart and hilarious and super thoughtful. And she's really great. And it's like 3.5 blocks from here. So it's totally fine. That's our close one. But we also super love Community Books, which is not at all in our neighborhood. It's on the other side of town, but it is a Black owned bookstore that has been servicing families since the 60s. And it's just like an institution in the city. It's really, it was giving people voice who couldn't get into other bookshops for decades, right? Like now it's a little bit more on people's radar, but they were doing it before other people were thinking about that at all. So then that's really cool. And it's called Community Book Center because they act as a community center and a bookstore. And then also there is Octavia Books. It just has a lovely feel. Like you walk into it, it's tucked deep into a neighborhood. So like if you didn't know to be looking for it, it's not like an avenue pop-up sign. It's like on a corner of two little side streets is this amazing little bookshop that's tucked in there. And then like there's like Tubby and Coos, which is in another part of town, but it's like caters to like the geeky side of us. So they have like books and board games. So then you get both of those things that are in there. And yeah, no, we have, for the size city that we are, we have a pretty decent selection of independent bookstores. For us, that's like a regular part of life. And it's one of the reasons why I love to live here. It's like so Southern, but like our kind of Southern.
It's hard not to draw a line from that bookseller who you saw every day into who you are now.
For me, writing is so much about joy. Like there's lots of jobs that I can have that would be crappy. So I try not to let this one be crappy. So
is that what drew you to writing for young people? Was that you wanted to write joyful things?
Yes, I have always written. And because I'm largely still the same person that I was when I was 7, I have always written for young people. So the story of deciding to become a writer, which is a different thing than writing, has a weird starting point, which is that I got my college's alumni magazine. And it was talking about all these like people that were like, oh, this person is like CEO of this, and this person made $1 million of this. And I was thinking, how good for them. Like, that's awesome that they are like doing a thing that they're excited about. And I would never want to do that, that thing that they're doing. Like I never would want to do it. It made me think, what is the thing that I would be sad if I never did, right? That I would feel like, dang it, I really missed out, like I should have done that thing. And that was it. Like that, it was writing. But it was at that point that I was like, well, I would be sad. So then I either need to do it or I need to not do it. So then I decided to do it. And I hate when people tell stories about grit because I don't really believe in it. But in a way, along with all the privileges that I have had, right, there is a little bit of grit that goes into something like that because you just have to not quit. Like not quitting doesn't guarantee, not just have to not quit. Not quitting does not guarantee that you will get it. It doesn't. And it's sad to say, but it's just very true. However, if you quit, you definitely won't. So not quitting is probably 85% of the formula of like how to be able to make that kind of thing happen. And so it was at that point that I was like, well, I'm going to do it. And I guess I'm not going to be able to quit. So then that'll be the thing. And every time there's been a bump in the road, I've been like, okay, but like, what's going to happen if you quit? Like, are you going to, like, is that going to somehow make it better? The answer is no, it's not. So then I just have to keep plugging along, like trying to make it work, so.
Yeah, that seems like something that should be embroidered on pillows and put in every author's office. Will it be better if you quit?
Almost 100% of the time, the answer to that is no. Like if you're not just answering the frustration of the moment, right? Like if you're thinking in 5 years, am I going to be happy that I quit? Most of the time, the answer is no. So
from that decision, you get the tremendous joy of not only having it in your alumni magazine, but you also have what I think is a very singular validation of children you must meet who come to you and say that they loved your book, which I think, particularly for your Jaden Toussaint series, I can't imagine how wonderful that must feel.
It is fun. It's a lot of fun. I love getting emails from kids. I adore getting paper notes in the mail. And I am the worst at in-person events because my line is long and slow. I love kids. I super actually want to know what they have to say. So then when I ask a question, like I want to know the answer, and then maybe we end up having a little conversation. And then my line is like so long, and the people next to me are like, come on. It's funny because my Jaden Toussaint series is published by a very small mission-driven press that it took a really long time before I started being invited to those kinds of events.
So what does mission-driven publisher means? I've never heard that before.
Right. So all of the books published by Plum Street Press are books that feature children of color as the protagonists, where race is not a factor in the story. So they get to be the main characters, but not have it be about the civil rights movement or slavery or any of the like very race driven, which are, hold on, just to be clear, extremely important and necessary books for us to have in our canon and in people's hands and for readers. It's just not the only books. Like people see them, I think people see more humanity in the books they read than in the people they come across every day. So it's limited, right? Like your circle is probably limited. Whoever you are, wherever you live, probably the circle of people that you are touching is limited and repetitive. And so then the way to be able to see other things is through media, including books. And so if you are seeing every time you see a brown person, they are in the midst, they are a slave or trying to fight against slavery or being mistreated or being like less than, even if they're the protagonist of that story, I think it does something to our collective psyche. And I think that there has to be balance for it.
So tell me, how did you come across this book that we're talking about today, this Octavia Butler book, Wildseed?
For Black women of a certain age and who have a certain love of literary, Octavia Butler is canon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So about 3 years ago, I set out to like reread her whole canon, and I did. And I can't stop thinking about Wildseed. And the part that blew my mind was how long ago all of these things were written. They don't read like they were written that long ago, but like the themes are just like spot on.
Can you give a rundown of the plot of this book for people who maybe haven't read it?
Sure. So this is Wildseed. So the story begins in Africa, mostly in unnamed areas. The idea is that it is very, very, very long ago, but not specifically named inside the story. And so there is a woman whose name is Anyanwu who can change herself. And she knows her body so well and has the ability to be able to essentially recode herself. She can make herself look younger. She can make herself look older. And because she can change herself so well, she's essentially immortal because any little thing that's wrong with her body, she'll just repair the thing. So it's like having a perfect car, right? Like one where they always have replacement parts. So there's that. She meets a person in a man's body whose name is Doro. And Doro is, I'm going to just for ease say that Doro is a spirit. That's a thing we can talk about if you would like, who can inhabit anybody's body. But when he inhabits their body, he kills them, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't last forever. He can't, like, the body's not going to accept him in perpetuity. He is essentially immortal. So he kills frequently because he will need or want a new body to be able to live in. So Doro is on a quest to be able to breed children that will be able to be immortal like him. And he promises Anyanwu that he can give her children that she won't have to watch die. And she's watched generations and generations of her children die by that point because none of them have whatever this thing is that she has that lets her change. So she goes with him willingly, but then he immediately attempts to subjugate her and turns her into a breeder and does all kinds of things, including forcing her to sleep with other people, killing some of their children, because his quest is essentially like a massive eugenics program. Mm-hmm. And he's got little pods of people that he's set up all over the world. And so he's constantly traveling to be able to check on all of them and see how the breeding progress is going. And then when he sees two promising specimens, he makes them come together to be able to do again. So this story is the story, I think, of Anyanwu's realization of like the consequences of her own mortality, right? Or immortality, right? The idea of the feminine versus the masculine, right? And also the power that one has when faced with something that is ostensibly all powerful.
This was a book that actually bowled me over because I kept thinking, oh, it's about this. And then after I finished it, I went and researched it. And there are scholarly papers all over about this book. And some of them say this is a story of the eternal conflict between male and female. And no, this is the story of the eternal conflict between black and white. This is a story of the eternal conflict between masters and slaves, between Africa and America, between human and eternal, faith and reason. And it's a mind-blowing book. Like, how the hell did she do this? She wrote this story that is about yes, and it's about everything. It is about every conflict ever. And you could make a scholarly dissertation on every one of those themes.
Absolutely. And I think that it's about all of those things. For me, I think that all of those things are related through power dynamic. And so then I think for me, ultimately, that is the larger theme, but then it like really depthly and specifically incorporates all of the things that you just said. Like you don't have to read into it to catch all of the themes that you just listed. Like all of those are explicit. There are like, until you get to the very end, you might think that their struggle would be ongoing, right? Because there's not actually a clear winner until she decides that there is one, right? And so even that is a power. Like ultimately I have power over myself. So, you can decide how you're going to react, but ultimately I have power over myself, is another thing that's in there. But if there are more books in the series, the theme gets even more, the power dynamic thing gets even related in even more ways.
So the 3 books that come after this one, do Doro and Anyanwu play a part in those, or do they move on to their descendants?
Clay's arc does not see Doro or Anyanwu, although one can assume that the people who are in it are also results of this breeding program.
Okay.
Right? But they're not directly mentioned. I am almost 100% certain, definitely not Anyanwu. I'm almost 100% certain that Doro, who wears many faces, so it's possible that he was a different person, but whatever. But I'm pretty sure he wasn't mentioned in it either. But Pattern Master, definitely. Okay. So if you were reading them, Clay's arc might feel like a diversion, but Mind of My Mind and Pattern Master are like direct lines, and they're in all 3.
So what is it about this book that appeals to you so much? What is it that draws you in and makes you call this one of your best books ever?
Yeah. So it has so many of the things that I want to be as a writer. I can't say that I've ever actually landed there, but like so many of the things that I want to be. So the moments of fantasy in this book are pure immersive joy, right? When she joins a pod of dolphins as a dolphin, but is also thinking about, heads up, the ethical and like ecological impact of her having done so. At the same time, I was like, what? I live right now. I absolutely live. Like, this is amazing. But at the same time, it's heavy. Like, it's really heavy, but also you could just read it as fantasy.
So there's a sneakiness to it that you like.
Yes. And the real, right? I don't think that we cannot be thoughtful, but I also think that we should all be able to have those moments of like being carried away and like being, so like I, at a certain point, had to stop following politics as deeply as I once did, because it was like traumatizing for me in a way. And I was feeling like there's not very much that I'm doing the things that I can do. There's not very much else that I can do. And so I feel like I'm experiencing this trauma over and again without being able to make it have a positive result. However, so that's like one side of it. On the other side of it, there is this idea of needing sometimes, like that's the idea of the Sabbath, right? That you need to be able to rest. You need to be able to get away. Otherwise, you as a person are not going to be able to continue forward. But I think that the things that are, for me, the most immersive and fun are things that let you think about those heavy things that politics would have you do, right? But you don't expect for the story to be able to give you a direct life result or to be able to impact it in any way. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a way of being able to wrestle with those same ideas, but also have your Sabbath, your day of rest at the same time.
So I was very much thinking throughout this book of, in 1980, she wrote this story of men destroying everything, and this woman coming in who you said she's sometimes a man, she sometimes presents as white, but predominantly I think we are to assume she's a Black woman, and constantly coming in, cleaning up his mess, gathering in these people who he has essentially destroyed, providing a home, providing a life, providing sustenance, and getting no credit. And all I could think was, Octavia Butler, she might be a wizard. I'm not entirely sure, but she might have been.
If you have not read Parable of the Sower yet, don't.
Okay. Okay.
Because it is eerily, the story starts in 2024. We're in 2020 and we're on track. It's like we're totally on track and it's a nightmare. It's the only one that is like a chronicle and a straight up chronicle and not story shaped, which if you read it by itself and hadn't read, like I was literally just reading all of her stuff, right? All at one time. Yeah. If I had read that one first, I might have thought that she just didn't understand story shape, except I knew good and darn well that she knew how to write a story shape. So then that made it even scarier because it really feels more like she's written down like through a character's perspective, obviously, but like that she's just written down and everything so far is, again, we're on track for the things. So like that book recently hit the New York Times bestseller list for the first time. She never made she was not a New York Times bestseller in her lifetime, but it was one of her life goals was to be one. So now she is one posthumously, but it's because that book is so scary accurate right now. So, I guess I don't want to say don't read it because obviously, but like, if you don't have the stomach, like just let it go because it doesn't look pretty from here.
I had my friend Marion Hill on a couple months ago, and I'm going to have him back because he very much wants to talk about that one. And so sometime next year I'm going to. But until then, I've got Kindred actually next to my bed right now. But she is definitely having a moment, which is unfortunate that it didn't happen in her lifetime, but it is magnificent that it's happening.
Wonderful that it's happening. Yeah, no, absolutely. And
so
Kindred is really good. Kindred is much more brutal. I know that just heads up, like than the one that we read here, but it's really good and it really shows her story arc chops. So yeah, go through those.
That's interesting that you say it's brutal. It's more brutal because lots of times I've seen that that's a good place to start if you've never read. That's often recommended is where you start with Octavia Butler.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm saying more brutal. It is. No. I stand by that. The thing that I said, I'm not adjusting it, but I'm going to put it in some context. So you've read Beloved?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like that. Beautiful, literary, lovely.
Yeah.
Like it's right. But just, it's heavy. It's
okay.
Heavy. Yeah.
So Marti, what are you reading these days? What's on your shelf? So
right now I'm reading a collection of essays and speeches by Philip Pullman. He is really great. If you're not familiar with Philip Pullman, he has written a lot of things, but I think his like most commercially known ones are called his Dark Materials series.
Sure.
And so the Golden Compass, the Amber Spy, the Subtle Knife, and the Amber Spyglass. They have compiled a bunch of his essays and speeches about creating story, and particularly he talks a lot about his Dark Materials series in these essays and speeches. I find it totally fascinating to hear other writers talk about their process because I don't ever use the exact same strategy for writing a book. Every time I try something new, because I think that you will, or I will, learn something different. So I really love to hear like behind the scenes for other writers and how they do their process. So as many times as I can, I read things like that, or if they have them in audiobook, then I'll get them in audiobook, sometimes both. So like Robert McKee's story is one that I have on audio because I can just leave it running. You'll catch something every time time.
Mhm.
Every time your brain keys back in from mopping or like whatever, you're gonna catch something that's like super useful. So it's like worth a multiple listen to.
Marti, I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed this. Will you tell our listeners all the places where they can find you and your books, about your books and all of that great information?
Absolutely. So the easiest place to find me probably is at my website, which is martidumasbooks.com. I am sporadically on Instagram, like a few times a week on Instagram. And my handle there is Mom Teacher Writer. And the same on Twitter. I'm on Twitter for exactly 5 minutes a day. So it's not, but it's there if you wanted to. Also Mom Teacher Writer. And same thing for Facebook. Facebook, I actually do a good bit more because I do tend to keep in touch with friends and family. So when people write to me on Facebook or send me messages or adorable little messages where their kid wrote the top part of the message and they wrote the bottom part saying, "Hey, yo, this was totally cool." Like that, those I tend to get a little bit faster because I do check Facebook every day. So then that is good there. But my website is probably your best bet. There's email on there. There's little free things that you can download that go with each of the stories that I've written, which are mostly for young people. I have a series of illustrated chapter books called Jaden, Toussaint the Greatest, which is about a kindergarten genius who solves all of his problems using the scientific method. And they are very funny, much funnier than solving your problems using the scientific method sounds, I think. And I also have
and beautifully illustrated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the illustrations are just gorgeous. They're love them.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So the first ones of those were done by Marie Moravsky, who is like an artiste. And she and her husband they are from Siberia. So just like, I'm going to say in Siberian, it's going to sound like extra wackadoodle, but they are in fact from Siberia. They moved into the woods in Siberia with just a hatchet so that they could build a house from scratch by hand. This is the level of artist that I'm talking about. Anyway, she's amazing. And then Stephanie Parkas is so cool and super, super talented. She is from Brazil, has grown up most of her life in Italy, is obsessed with anime. And we got to go to her wedding, which was amazing, in Italy, which was really lovely. And she continues to produce art that just like absolutely blows me away. So I'm super excited to be able to know her and to have gotten to work with her on those. And she also did the cover for The Little Human, which is a middle grade fantasy about a little girl who wants to be able to swim in the sea and is in for a huge surprise when she finally does. And the cover for that book is just jaw-dropping. You just like look at it and you're like, what? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not in charge of any of that, but how amazing that it's amazing, right? And then I have a series called The Seeds of Magic, which is about a little girl who finds a chrysalis in her backyard that instead of incubating a butterfly, incubates a dragon. And so it's the last one in that series that I am working on right now. And I keep saying that I'm 1 week away from finished and it keeps stretching out. I think I'm 1 week away from done on that manuscript. So,
well, Marti, thank you so much. This has been so fun. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad we got to talk.
I hope you'll come back another time and talk to me more about whoever your next binge read is.
Anytime. Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, bookworms. For more information on this episode and links to everything we discussed, please go to our website, bestbookeverpodcast.com, or follow us on Instagram at bestbookeverpodcast. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and you can find me everywhere as Julie Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on whatever podcatcher you use. Reviews really help our visibility to new listeners, and we are so grateful for everyone. If you want access to exclusive content, including extra interview time with our guests, advance notice of the books we're going to discuss, monthly curated book selections, and more, go to patreon.com/bestbookever. That's patreon.com/bestbookever to support us. Your financial support really helps with the expenses of running this podcast. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.